What makes a city more than just stone, walls, and people? What transforms a forgotten settlement beside a river into a force capable of changing the world forever? Was Rome destined for greatness from the beginning, or was its empire forged through struggle, sacrifice, and blood? This is the story of Rome, from blood to empire. Episode 1, The City Born in Blood. Before Rome became an empire, before its legions marched across continents, before emperors wore purple and senators whispered beneath marble columns, there was only a river, a cluster of hills, and a few fragile settlements fighting to survive. No Colosseum. No Caesars. No golden eagles carried into battle. Only smoke rising from huts. Mud beneath bare feet. Shepherds watching the tree line. Families living close to hunger, weather, wolves, and rival tribes. And yet, from this uncertain beginning, one city would grow powerful enough to shape law, language, politics, war, architecture, religion, and memory for more than 2,000 years. The question is not simply how Rome rose. The question is how something so small became impossible to forget. The Tiber River was not just water. It was movement. It carried trade, food, danger, and possibility. It connected the inland hills to the sea. It gave early communities a reason to gather, bargain, fight, and defend the crossing points that mattered. Whoever controlled this river controlled a doorway through central Italy. The land around it was not empty. Latins, Sabines, Etruscans, and other peoples lived, traded, raided, and competed across the region. Rome was not born in isolation. It was born in a crowded world. That may be why Rome learned one lesson early: survival belonged to those who adapted. The Romans did not tell their origin as a quiet story. They told it with betrayal, abandonment, wild animals, and blood. According to legend, twin brothers named Romulus and Remus were born into danger. Their royal blood made them a threat. So they were placed in a basket and left to the mercy of the river. The river should have become their grave. Instead, the story says, it carried them to survival. A she-wolf found them. A shepherd raised them. And the boys who were supposed to disappear grew into men who dreamed of founding a city. But Rome's first story was never only about rescue. It was about destiny sharpened by violence. When Romulus and Remus decided to found a city, the question became deadly. Where would it stand? Who would rule? Ancient tradition says the brothers argued over signs from the gods. They looked to birds in the sky. They claimed divine approval. But beneath the ritual was something more human. Power. One city could not have two founders if both demanded the highest place. Then the legend darkened. Romulus killed Remus. A brother murdered a brother, and Rome was born beneath a shadow. Whether the story happened exactly this way is impossible to prove, but the Romans preserved it because it told them something about themselves. Rome was not born innocent. Rome was born fighting. The Rome of legend did not begin as a perfect nation. It began as a gathering place. Tradition says Romulus opened the city to fugitives, exiles, wanderers, runaway slaves, and men without a future elsewhere. Rome's earliest strength, in this story, was not purity. It was absorption. The city took in people who needed protection and gave them a new identity. Roman. The legend of the Sabine women, troubling and violent as it is, reflected an ancient memory of conflict, marriage, and forced union between neighboring peoples. Rome's future would be built on a pattern already visible at its birth. Fight the enemy. Absorb the enemy. Become stronger because of the enemy. After Romulus, tradition remembered 6 more kings. Some were warriors. Some were builders. Some were lawmakers. Some belonged more to memory than certainty. But together, they represented Rome's first transformation. The city began to organize. Religious rituals took shape. Political customs formed. The army became more structured. Public spaces began to matter. Marshy ground was drained. Roads and sacred boundaries were marked. Rome was still small, but it was no longer only a village. It was becoming a city. And every city needs more than walls. It needs stories, rules, gods, ceremonies, and shared fears strong enough to bind strangers into one people. Rome did not rise alone. North of Rome stood the Etruscans, one of the most sophisticated peoples of ancient Italy. Their cities were wealthy. Their craftsmen were skilled. Their religion was complex. Their rulers understood ceremony, architecture, trade, and power. Early Rome learned from them. The Romans absorbed Etruscan symbols of authority, religious practices, engineering skills, and elements of public spectacle. The purple robe. The curule chair. The fasces carried before magistrates. The idea that power should be seen, staged, and feared. Rome would later present itself as unique. But in its youth, it borrowed constantly. That was one of its secrets. Rome did not need to invent everything. It needed to take what worked. A city is not born only through battle. It is born through labor. Under the kings, Rome expanded its public spaces. Tradition connected this period to major works that would shape the city's future, including drainage projects that helped turn low, wet ground into the Roman Forum. The Forum would become the heart of Rome. A place of markets, speeches, trials, ceremonies, elections, funerals, rumors, and ambition. At first, it may have been little more than reclaimed ground between hills. But Rome had a gift for turning practical needs into symbols. Drain the swamp, make a meeting place. Build a center. Give the city a heart. Kingship gave Rome order. But it also created fear. A king could lead armies, judge disputes, perform rituals, and represent the city before the gods. In a dangerous world, that concentration of power could feel necessary. But power that protects can also dominate. The Romans would later remember their kings with mixed feelings. Some were praised. Others were feared. And the final king would become a warning told for centuries. His name was Lucius Tarquinius Superbus. Tarquin the Proud. Even the name sounds like an accusation. In Roman memory, he was not simply a king, he was the lesson that no Roman was supposed to forget. Tarquinius Superbus was remembered as arrogant, ruthless, and unwilling to respect tradition. Ancient sources say he ruled without proper consultation. He surrounded himself with armed men. He used fear where earlier kings had used custom. He treated Rome less like a community and more like a possession. Whether every detail is true is difficult to know. Roman historians wrote long after the events, and they shaped the past through moral lessons. But what matters is what the Romans believed the story meant. A king who places himself above law becomes a tyrant, and a city that tolerates tyranny loses itself. Rome was approaching the moment when private outrage would become political revolution. The story that ended the monarchy centered on Lucretia. Ancient Roman writers described her as noble, faithful, and respected. Her suffering became the spark that turned anger into action. The details of the story are tragic and should be handled with care. What matters for Roman memory is this: an act of violence committed by a member of the royal family became proof that kingship itself had become corrupted. Lucretia's pain was transformed into a public crisis. Her family and allies called Rome to witness what royal arrogance had done, and in that moment, the question was no longer whether Tarquin was a bad king. The question was whether Rome should ever have kings again. Lucius Junius Brutus became the face of the uprising. In Roman tradition, he seized the moment and transformed grief into a vow. No more kings. Not this king. Not another king. Not ever. The monarchy was no longer seen as a flawed institution that needed a better ruler. It was seen as a danger built into the idea itself. Rome would not solve tyranny by choosing a kindermaster. Rome would reject mastery. This was the emotional birth of the Republic, not calm fury, but rage, grief, memory, and fear hardened into political law. Rome's hatred of kings began here, and it would never fully disappear. The Romans expelled Tarquin. The last king left the city, but he did not leave quietly. Tradition says he sought help from outside powers, trying to force his way back onto the throne. Rome's revolution was not secure simply because the people declared it. It had to be defended. Power rarely disappears because someone says it should. It must be removed, resisted, and remembered. The early republic was born under threat. Its first breath was not peaceful. It was surrounded by danger, haunted by the king it had cast out, and uncertain whether its new political experiment would survive. The Romans created a new political order. They called it the residential publica. The public thing. Power would not belong to a king. It would be divided among magistrates, assemblies, religious offices, and the Senate. This was not democracy as we know it today. Rome remained unequal. Aristocratic families held enormous influence. Ordinary citizens had limited power and would spend generations fighting for greater rights. But the principle mattered. No single man should own the state. No Roman should bow to a king. The Republic was not born perfect, it was born suspicious of power. And that suspicion would shape Roman history for centuries. The Republic was free from kings. But not everyone was equal. Rome was divided between patricians and plebeians. The patricians were elite families who controlled much of political and religious life. The plebeians were the broader body of citizens, farmers, craftsmen, traders, workers, and soldiers. They carried Rome's burdens. They fought in its armies. They worked its fields. They paid its debts. But power remained concentrated in the hands of the few. Rome had escaped monarchy. Now it had to confront inequality inside freedom itself. Rome's army was not yet the professional machine that would one day conquer the Mediterranean. It was built around citizens. Farmers became soldiers when danger came. Men left fields, took up shields, marched under commanders, and returned home if they survived. The citizen owed service to the city. But the city also owed something to the citizen. When wars grew longer, that balance became harder to maintain. A farmer away from his land could return to debt. A soldier who defended Rome could come home poorer than before. Even in its earliest centuries, Rome's strength contained a hidden problem. The Republic needed its citizens. But it did not always protect them. The Republic did not begin with peace. It began surrounded. Neighboring peoples tested the young state. Some wanted land. Some feared Rome's growth. Some supported the exiled Tarquin. Others simply saw weakness. Rome had overthrown its king, but now it had to prove it could survive without one. If the Republic failed militarily, monarchy might return. If Rome lost its wars, its political experiment would die before it matured. So war became more than defense. It became identity. Rome learned to see survival, discipline, and expansion as part of the same story. The city that feared kings also feared weakness. For centuries, Roman politics would be haunted by one accusation. King. To call a man a king was not just criticism. It was a threat. It suggested he wanted to enslave citizens, destroy liberty, and place himself above the Republic. This fear became part of Rome's political bloodstream. It could protect freedom. But it could also become a weapon. Ambitious men would accuse rivals of seeking kingship. Reformers could be branded tyrants. Generals with too much popularity could terrify the Senate. Rome had killed monarchy. But it had not killed ambition. That ambition was waiting. And one day, it would return wearing a different name. In its beginning, Rome learned lessons that would define its future. Absorb outsiders. Fear kings. Honor discipline. Adapt quickly. Turn defeat into training. Turn enemies into citizens. Turn memory into law. These ideas did not make Rome invincible. Nothing does. But they gave Rome a rare ability to survive shocks that might have destroyed other cities. Rome could lose battles and continue. Rome could suffer crisis and reorganize. Rome could borrow from rivals and call it Roman. This was the beginning of a pattern the world would one day recognize. Rome did not merely conquer. Rome transformed what it touched. And it was transformed in return. The Republic promised that Rome would never again belong to one man. But promises are easier to make than to keep. The same system that rejected kings also rewarded glory. It celebrated military success. It honored public service. It gave ambitious men a stage. A successful general could become a hero. A hero could become a threat. A threat could claim to be saving the Republic. That danger lay far in the future, but its seeds were already present. Rome had created a system designed to prevent tyranny. But it had also created a culture that worshipped victory. One day, those two forces would collide. At the end of its royal age, Rome was still only one city among many. But it was no longer ordinary. Its people had survived kings, absorbed neighbors, organized institutions, and built a political identity around freedom from monarchy. The next challenge would be harder. Rome would have to survive Italy. Hill tribes. Rival cities. Latin neighbors. Etruscan powers. Mountain warriors. Alliances that shifted with fear and opportunity. The Republic would not rise because peace protected it. It would rise because conflict trained it. Rome's first great conquest was not Carthage. It was not Greece. It was not Gaul. It was Italy. Before Rome could rule the Mediterranean, it had to dominate the peoples closest to it. And that would take generations of war, alliance, betrayal, defeat, recovery, and negotiation. This is where Rome became dangerous. Not because it always won, but because it refused to accept that defeat had to be final. Other cities could win a battle against Rome and believe the matter settled. Rome would return. Again. And again, until the enemy was destroyed, allied, absorbed, or renamed as part of Rome itself. Rome did not begin as marble. It began with mud. With fear. With borrowed customs. With violent legends. With citizens suspicious of kings and willing to fight for a city that was still learning what it wanted to become. The later Romans would cover their origins in glory, but beneath the glory was something harder and more revealing. Rome was built by people who believed survival required discipline. They believed memory mattered. They believed weakness invited domination. And they believed that if the city endured, almost any sacrifice could be justified. That belief would make Rome powerful. It would also make Rome dangerous. The city had escaped its kings. But freedom would not make Rome peaceful. It would make Rome hungry. The Republic was young, surrounded, unequal, ambitious, and afraid of weakness. It had sworn never to bow before a king again. But it had not yet learned what victory would cost. In the next chapter, Rome begins the long and brutal struggle to conquer Italy, and in doing so, becomes something far more dangerous than a city. It becomes a machine. If history has taught us anything, it's that the greatest mysteries are often the ones we think we've already solved. What do you think truly made Rome different? Its army, its politics, its discipline, or its ability to absorb its enemies? History Beyond, where the past never stays buried.